it's pretty emotional today, listening to the keynotes and then like really thinking about the brain trust in the room is like, it's really powerful. I have to really say thank you to everyone here at the Franklin Institute for allowing this fellowship to have such a robust feeling about it all, and a relaxed feeling. And I really am grateful for our provost who put his energy and time to make this happen, and he's here physically. That means a lot to us. We really thank you for your time to be here. Yes. I have one of my student researchers here, and so she's just smiling because she's a first-year grad student. She's came through our undergrad program in jazz studies. And one of the things that's really urgent for me, about this project, and I'm really passionate about it, is that idea that in the performing arts, research doesn't really exist. And to have people have that feeling, or to have students think that you perform and that's it. Research doesn't have any place in what you do. And to see her enthusiasm and the enthusiasm from my students, it just kept opening up like a flower for me of what to do and how to do it. So I'm learning, like Tony, I concur, just learning a lot. So my project is Interpreting the Arts, a digital library of artists of African descent for humanities, teaching in the performing and visual arts. That's what got it all started. But then I'm always thinking about end result. And so I umbrellaed it. The umbrella over that is great artists past and present. And so I'll give you a little bit of background about that. I'm an assistant professor at NCCU. I'm a jazz musician. I've been a jazz musician since I was 15 years old. Toured around the world for 20 years, and then kind of did a Lyceum series concert at NCCU. The director of jazz studies asked me would I come and teach. I said, no, I'm not leaving New York. And then my friend said, call back and see if you can do it part-time. And so I started doing it half of the week, and every single week for 2 years I went back to New York. And then North Carolina bit me, and jazz studies at NCCU really got me because what he's created there is pretty amazing. So thank you for including that poster, Ronald, in the presentation. So what I want is for students, part of the time I lived in New York, 20 years, I made my living as a teaching artist. So my vision for this project was to provide a way for teaching artists to have curated materials when they have to create their items that they go into and do a residency. Whether they go into a prison or a hospital or a school, they have to cull together information. Well, then the integrity of that information depends on what they know or don't know. You know, when I was doing it, there was no Wikipedia. So you really had to do a lot of digging. But now teaching artists, and the teaching artist field, I'll explain in a second, is very interesting because it's mostly, there's not a lot of diversity. It's mostly white women who are authors. You don't find a lot of people of color in teaching, the teaching artist field, and they don't know how to get into it. A lot of times they don't know it exists until they're trying to get hired by a school, and the school says, well, no, you don't know enough. You need to be able to do speak the language of the arts administrators and the teachers, so they make sure that you know the things that they need to migrate over to the students. So when my students wanted to know, how do I work, you know, if I'm not performing, if I'm not on the road, how do I work? I said, oh, you can be a teaching artist. And they said, well, what's that? And so in the northern cities where I lived, I grew up in Chicago, spent time in Boston for undergrad, New York. It's a big, you know, teaching artist is very prevalent and a known entity. Here in the Southeast and in the South, it's very different. And in North Carolina, there was not a place for teaching for artists, whether they were artists, dancers, musicians, painters. There wasn't a way for them to be trained. So when I went to the Durham Council of the Arts, or in North Carolina Council of the Arts, and I said, do you have a teaching artist training program? They said, no. And I said, well, how do the people get on your roster? And they say, well, it's kind of trial and error. They keep applying until they get on it. And I thought, wow. So there's this void. And my father always taught me, you know, watch the crowd and go the other way. So, you know, there was a void there. I said, oh, you know, we could have a program here that could fill this void. And that started, and I kept knocking on enough doors at NCCU until people said yes. Again, the provost was like, yes, let's do this. So we got it started, the certificate program, but there needed to be, for me, content for teaching artists to use. Creating the curriculum to teach the teaching artists was one part of it, but then the content, it's like, okay, they can go everywhere, or we can create a digital library for them to come to one place. So this is a long-term project. When I was a young kid, I would come home, and this book my dad always used. I would run home and tell him, I learned about, you know, Alexander Graham Bell. He says, oh yeah, well, did you know about Lewis Latimer? You know, he would open the book, and he would never make an issue about race about it. He would just say, there's always somebody else who you don't know about, who had something to do with what you do know about. And that always stayed with me. And my pet peeve is that you celebrate someone, or you create and find a gravestone for someone who was brilliant, amazing, and had a contribution to arts and culture, and you don't hear about them until after they're gone. So how does our generation now, when I ask my singers, do you know who Ma Rainey was? Many of them don't, but they'll know who Beyonce is, right? So how do we fix that? And the words to this: if you're traveling on your journey and it's lonely, this is from a lyric from a song I wrote. Traveling far and it's lonely, keeping the dreams that you've sown, see the truth as it is, or the life that you live may not be your own. So what I really hope is that the impact of creatives of our generation will be able to hear from, in this project, from the mouths of those who create and who have been inspired by those who came before. And this can happen in video, historical photos, audio, in story maps, timelines, live interviews. And why digital? So our students are engaged digitally. 7 seconds, they're on their phone, right? But also to correct historical omission, because one of my mentors would always say to me, omission is a form of lying, and a lie doesn't care who tells it. And then many people can have an eraser. So the historical erasure that we spoke about earlier exists in music and in culture. And what's for me is even more of a very personal frustration is in America, jazz is supposedly considered America's national treasure. But you have the miseducation about that from very young. In schools, you don't have a way to, there isn't any institutionalized focus to ameliorate that miseducation about jazz music and what it means. So I'm hoping that this project can lead to help some of those issues. So what you're going to see now is each of the story maps were created by my student researchers. I have 3 student researchers and an adjunct faculty working with me on this project, because I was able to also use it for funding from NCCU for an innovation award. So I married the 2 projects together. So this first, I'll go a little bit because I know we only have 10 minutes. I'm a little challenged spatially. You know, music is my thing, so space stuff gets interesting. So let's see if this, yes. So I'm going to go through it fast, so you have a chance to see. But they really did work. And what was interesting of the excitement of the students for me was that someone who is really great at composing or singing, when they started researching and writing, it was a whole new world. They're like, wow, I had no idea about the people that I sing the songs about, really what was going on in their lives, how many things they had to overcome, their challenges, how they worked. And in putting together these story maps, they had a level of enthusiasm that wasn't there just sitting in their classrooms, and they have history in their other classrooms. But it's also the juxtaposition of an elder musician or a musician that's known and famous, you know, Thelonious Monk. Orrin Evans was recently here for the Duke performances Monk at 100. And Orrin is a personal friend, and I had him come to the university. And do we have volume? Do we have sound? Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, Orrin Evans on piano. That's one of our NCCU alums on bass there. This is on the B&Duke stage. Okay, this is a hydrovideographer. You did an interview, and this is when you talk about having teaching artists have raw materials. It's important for them to be able to make the connections. What do you say to a classroom full of fifth graders about Thelonious Monk?
If I was going to really create a situation where I had to teach Monk and find something, the first thing I would really deal with are the titles of his songs. Because the titles of his songs deal with whatever he was going through at that time in his life. So it connects, whether it connects to American history, whether it connects to his history, whether it connects to his family. He's got tunes that are written for his family. He's got tunes that are written about different dance moves, So really just checking out the titles of his tunes and how they apply to what he was going through at that time in his life. And I hope when I'm 100, that's what people are able to do, because most of the time, if we think about as composers, the titles have something to do with something that's going on in the world today or in your life. So the first thing I would do, especially in the senior citizens home, because these are people who could probably relate to the time, whatever the tunes are. We're talking about his tunes that go back to 1952, 51, when he started composing.
Okay, so, one of the things that I had encountered when new as a teaching artist was, where do I start and what do I do? It was really trial and error. There wasn't anyone to kind of tell me what to do, and it doesn't have to be hard like that. This is another map that done by a student researcher, John Coltrane. And what I've done first with this first layer of artists is use artists who were from North Carolina, so that there was that relevance, connection.
Try to find that. What is it? What is it? It may be, I actually had a fifth grader who loved a picture of Coltrane. He just loved the suit he had on. I said, cool. He wasn't into the music. I put on Love Supreme. He didn't know what was happening. He wasn't into it. But he loved that suit because that suit reminded him of his grandfather. So we started there, and that's the way that I think you need to bring the kids to the music. What is it that speaks to you? Because it might not be the music first, but I bet if we can find one thing that speaks to you, it'll eventually be the music.
Mm-hmm. So Nina Simone, again, North Carolinian born, and our story map creator is in the room, Ms. Deprecia Townsend. And Nina Simone, she says, I had no idea there was so much about Nina Simone to learn. She really has a rich and deep biography. But to begin, she says, I could learn For Women, Miss Hammonds, and we could tape For Women. I says, well, what about the lady who sang For Women? Let's find out about her. And one of the things that she connected to was meeting and working with someone who identifies Nina Simone as a mentor or as an influence is our local Nina Freeline, right? She's internationally renowned, but happens to live in North Carolina. And that also was part of the connection and importance of the students in the Teaching Artist Certificate program is make a connection to someone living now, and do that at every layer of the work that you do. Okay. There we go. What the timeline, again, this is Deprecia's work. What the timeline was, I found interesting about it, was talking to students about when their work will happen when they graduate. Because sometimes they don't make the connection that there may be a decade of real deep work that you're able to do. And then you may start to work on having a family, or you may travel, especially for women who want that as an idea. I had to talk to them about what happens in your life. And seeing it this way, the timeline affords an ability to jump from the story maps to the timeline, but also to visually see what is the life of an artist like and what happens, what else could be going on concurrently in history in the 1950s. So you see that Nina Simone worked at that you know, she was born in 1933, but it wasn't until she was in her mid-20s that she really started to work and travel. Romar Bearden, again, North Carolinian born, and Beverly McIver, both have history and, you know, great artists. And let me see if I can get to this map here. So they did a lot of work on their maps, and I really wanted them to do the maps and not me, because I wanted there to be that two-pronged thing of the content creation for things that could be used in the coursework and the students learning how to do that, and the uses of it, so that they would be interested in terms of their own research going forward. That whole pedagogical point, but also the scaffolding that happens when they feel like the agency of, okay, I can do this, and what are how do I move forward from it? There we go. Now, there we are, and Baba Chuck Davis, and in dance. And Chuck Davis was such a big personality, if you knew him, and the impact that he had in his recent passing. So, just a good job, I think, that the students did in digging up materials all this semester. They worked all semester long on it. Mia Love, who works at the American Dance Festival, but she's in New York, teaches at Smith College, is a New York-based choreographer and dancer. So I tried to get people who were young, old, and make sure that the students would know that they could have an opportunity to use the arts and use this website eventually to create their own materials. So, Deprecia, can you please pass out those items? I just made 6 to share. But at the end of the day, the website and the content materials are so that the teaching artists can create an item like this. So this is an example of a residency plan that I would give to a school when I would go into the school. And you'll see it's 6 pages, but in order to be able to create that much content, you have to know where to get it from. How do you make connections to the curriculum for 4th grade or 5th grade? You have to know the learning standards. You have to know how to conduct the conversation and do classroom management. You have to know how to kind of follow with the curriculum. So creating that kind of material is very labor intensive. And if you're expecting a new graduate as a dance major or an art major or a theater major or a music major to be able to go and get a job doing that, that's why they get turned down from the arts councils and the rosters. That's why they're not successful in that application to those lucrative positions where when I worked as a teaching artist, I could very well have just kept I made a living in New York doing that. And then I would tour for 2 months or go on the road for 6 months, and then I would come back, and maybe I'd have a residency with Carnegie Hall or Brooklyn Philharmonic. And it is a viable career. So there's an entrepreneurial aspect to the whole project that hasn't really been excavated because it was, not so much time. But I'm super excited. I look for your feedback, ideas about, where to find funding, because I see this as being a long-term big project. So that's it. Thank you.
Can we get together and talk about the entrepreneurship part? Since I used to teach media and entrepreneurship, and most of my students came from the music part.
Sure, absolutely.
On the wall back there, you had a question.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. I was looking at your handout. First, thank you, for the presentation. I'm really excited about the project and the idea of bringing all of this information, as you stated, the miseducation of, in the first half, how jazz is perceived, who did it, who is it for, and what have you. Piggybacking on that, I'm wondering if you're going to have some profiles of female jazz musicians and composers, because a lot of times that narrative is circulating around jazz as, men as composers.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Jerry Allen. I have a lot of, there are about 20 people on this initial list, but the money can only go so far. Right? But for me, that's a big deal. I used to be president of International Limited Jazz when I was in New York, and I was on the soapbox about hire women and the whole misogyny, all the kinds of ways that women are treated in the music business and the music industry. It's a big deal for me. I also neglected to thank Courtney Reed Eaton at the Center for Documentary Studies for her help and assistance with ideation and lending me a researcher and her support and encouragement. I just thank you.
One of the things that struck me is that there are two examples come to mind, and age is catching up with me, but not the curator, what do you call it when you're in charge of an estate? Executive of the Romeo Didden estate is the doctor in Savannah who was the surgeon in Detroit. I'll get a name to you.
Okay, great.
So the real-time, live, updated hookup with some of the people you show.
Yes.
Because not only is he one of the foremost collectors of Afro-American art, he's been doing the building exhibits around the country and has a lot to say, and his own history coming out of the 60s and so on. So that's one example. The other example would be Leonard Brown and the folks up at Northeastern who have done the Coltrane concert for the last, I think it's probably on 30 years now. And so that's another venue that would probably love to collaborate with you, because after Coltrane died, Alice used to come to the concerts, and there are all kinds of interviews and tapes and workshops with kids in schools and so on. So there's a way to do what you're doing and to give students this hook to contemporary stuff that's still trying to roll this tradition forward, as you have done a superb job in showing us.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Oh, yes.
It seems to be trying to address curriculum. It is structured in order to address curriculum to diversify the work of teaching artists, and to also create this content and engage students and other people and artists, I assume, and creatives in the creation of this content. And so it's so multifaceted and complex, because it also sort of presses at the kind of structured supremacy that keeps us out of the teaching positions that actually of the culture we actually contributed to probably the most, right? So I'm just wondering if you could, what expertise, do you have an advisory board? Like, how are you gonna, it's such a big and important project, how are you gonna structure the ways in which you can advance and intertwine those different aspects to get the kind of impact to break open this field in the ways that I think this project suggests and you have explained to us today?
Thank you. My first thought was today, listen carefully. So I've been listening to everything that you and Dr. Bailey both shared today. I took copious notes because I don't know. Mm-hmm. And I went to Dean Gant and said, this project is mushrooming. Help. Mm-hmm. And he says, okay, we'll sit down. Once after commencement, we can sit down and kind of look at what's come to the forefront after it. And talking to Courtney Reed Eaton about like what happens with something like this, where you have these tributaries that you could follow any one of them and continue, how to get funding to support more research, to keep having, I just, see a line of pianists, I see a line of, because if that book, Great Negroes Past and Present, was a website, or if I had that kind of, we always had the encyclopedia to go to, and you have these modules. How do I keep creating? There's so many, it could just continue. I don't know. I'm going to go to my provost, though, after commencement and ask him to lead me as to what exactly to do next.
And you have your fellow cohort.
Yeah, your cohort. Yeah. Because you could go down the content rabbit hole forever, right? Because that's what we all love to do, right? But it seems to me, this is what I'm hearing, it might not be what you're saying, right, that your objective is to break open, so that the content is so that you can break open visiting, teaching fellows, right, and to do that work. So how do you keep that work front and center? That's the funding. That's, do you see what I'm saying? Like, that's what I heard you lead with when we talked over there. You said it was really hard for me to find this as a position. It's generally, you told us, it's you know, white women authors who keep on calling over and over again and getting these jobs. So I heard you say, I'm really trying to make sure that we get these, that we're involved in this. Right? So how do you keep that front and center? And it seems to me that's where the funding is too. You do it through the content. Does that make sense? Am I hearing you?
No, you are hearing me exactly right. Like, how do I make sure that there is the piece of creating content for the course? Right. And then there is the creating the vehicle to kind of write the historical omission and to create research and opportunity for more pedagogical uses, for visiting fellows, and for authorship, for a lot of things that, I don't know. I could feel that it's big. I could feel that it's kind of legacy work. And I'm a little nervous about it. But I understand what you're saying. So I hope that means that I can call you for more conversation about this. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.